And we've just heard some stunning new testimony, new evidence linking President Trump as the leader of the person, in their words, who was personally and substantially involved in inciting the January 6th riot, the storming of the United States Capitol. We have also learned some breaking news in just the last few minutes about this committee plans to subpoena former President Trump. We want to bring in our senior White House and political correspondent, Ed O'Keefe. He's on Capitol Hill. Tell us what this means.
Nora, good afternoon. 3 people familiar with this decision tell us that the January 6th committee will be voting to subpoena former President Trump during this hearing, a significant escalation in this panel's investigative work and a significant moment, if you think about it now, in American political history. What's unclear is if they're going to subpoena him for direct testimony or for more documents. And we got a hint at the beginning of the hearing that this might happen when Chairman Thompson made clear today's proceedings are a business meeting, not a hearing with witnesses. That's a big difference with a distinction up here on Capitol Hill. When you hold a business meeting, you can hold votes. When you're holding a hearing, you're just hearing testimony from witnesses. So by holding this business meeting today, they can hold that vote apparently later in the hearing, after the recess at some point, to subpoena the former president. Important to remember, however, there have been a handful of Trump associates who have defied subpoenas from this committee. Steve Bannon, Mark Meadows, Dan Scavino, Peter Navarro, all senior political and White House aides to the president. 2 of them indicted by the Justice Department. That was, of course, Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro. Mark Meadows and Dan Scavino were not charged by the Justice Department. So the committee's doing this knowing that those around the president, some of them have defied these subpoenas, others have agreed, and there's a likelihood that the former president will flout the subpoena or at least plan to fight it in court. But again, Nora, a significant escalation in this panel's work, as it's unclear where exactly its work will go after today and how much longer it will exist, especially if control of the House flips to Republicans next year.
All right, Ed O'Keefe with that breaking news up on Capitol Hill. I want to bring in John Dickerson. Well, Trump would not be the first president to be subpoenaed, but it's unlikely that he would ever appear, correct?
Well, it would be unless he wanted to just turn this into such a spectacle, but this committee would know to shape things in such a way to avoid that. Among the things they might ask him is what Adam Schiff was just talking about. When Cassidy Hutchinson testified in the end of June, she said there was this moment where the president was told there were armed supporters of his who were there, and he said, bring them in. He knew there was danger. And a lot of people said, well, that's just her testimony. They tried to negate what she said, although not in public, of course. What Schiff did today was connect the dots and show that the Secret Service did know they were armed and that the president did have this information. And that takes it differently. That means he premeditatedly whipped up a crowd that he knew was armed to go to the Capitol. Yeah,
a couple different things here. We'll get into that the president knew probably as early as July 2020 that he was going to lose. And so he began this campaign, according to Brad Parscale, that he would say, well, the election was stolen from us. So that was premeditated, that part. But interestingly also, I think what we learned new today is not only the president laying out this lie in advance, but that the Secret Service, other intelligence agencies, the FBI, knew that there could be violence up on Capitol Hill. They saw it building, Catherine.
Well, that's right. We've had over 1 million records provided by the Secret Service to the committee. And what we heard at the testimony is that as they went through those records, they found all of these intelligence data points that the Capitol would be stormed, invaded, or occupied. And more specifically, that the head of then President Trump's security detail knew that people in the crowd were armed that day. What jumps out at me, Nora, is that the committee has really indicated they think some of the witnesses may have perjured themselves, that they said this was information that was unknown to them. But of course, the internal Secret Service records are telling them otherwise.
It is stunning. Our chief national affairs and justice correspondent, Jeff Pegues, is also with us. The Secret Service, I mean, as she was just talking about, as early as 10 days before, they had advance information, and about the Proud Boys as well.
Yeah, there were alarms going off, and we've been wondering for some time now, why weren't those alarms addressed? Because in so many ways, there were failures here by law enforcement, not only in the lead up to the rally and then during the rally, but as things started to go south at the Capitol. I was there, as you know. I know everybody's tired of hearing that, but I was there, and you could see how long it took for law enforcement to send in reinforcements. So there's still so many unanswered questions about why wasn't the response and the preparation more robust?
But again, the point is that what they've shown today is that the president heard these alarms, and he wasn't alarmed. He saw an opportunity, and that's him at the center of this moment of violence. It's not just what didn't they do to stop it; it's that he egged it on. And that's what this new data today suggested.
Could we go back to this subpoena idea?
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
This is important because this is where this investigation is heading. We shouldn't be surprised that we're at this point where this committee wants to subpoena the former president, because that's the way these investigations work. You interview people, as you know, you interview people around the person who is deemed to be the primary target. And in this case, even though this is not a court of law, it's the former president, and they are usually the last person to call to testify.
But as someone who covers the Justice Department, you could explain this much better than me. It's probably not Congress who's going to have the last word on this. It's the Justice Department. And as Liz Cheney said today, they will probably make criminal referrals. And Attorney General Merrick Garland now is at the head of what is the largest ever investigation of a former president. Stunning in its scope and could be a political earthquake.
Yeah, and, you know, this is a former president who is already facing so many legal challenges that the average person would have been on their knees by now, but he is still pushing back. And so I suspect, as you noted, he's going to push back again. However, take lessons from Roger Stone, one of his best friends on earth. They do communicate. They are close. And Roger Stone, when he testified before this committee, what did he do? He took the Fifth. We also know former President Trump, in other cases, has taken the Fifth, in some cases more than 400 times. So he might show up, but he won't say a lot.
Part of this committee has been about accountability, right? As the vice chair of the committee said, there's people have got to be held accountable so that it doesn't happen again, that our democracy stays intact. And according to Liz Cheney, she says the central cause of January 6th was one man, Donald Trump. He was personally and substantially involved in all of it. They laid out the premeditation. Then they laid out the coordination. Then they laid out the failure of the intelligence communities who also knew about what was happening. I want to bring in Scott MacFarlane. The question has always been about these far-right groups, the Proud Boys. Many of them, some have pleaded guilty, others charged with seditious conspiracy. How closely were they coordinating with the president himself or his closest advisors?
We heard that word a lot already today, premeditated. And this committee has been focused, if not fixated, on the far-right groups from the start. The Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, who were not only here January 6th, and according to prosecutors, part of either the fight against police or part of the breach of the Capitol. The Oath Keepers accused of using that military stack to get inside. During the first part of this hearing, they drew a line, this panel did, between the Oath Keepers and Roger Stone, that person who Jeff says is very much in Trump's orbit, in Trump's inner circle. Connective tissue between Roger Stone and the Oath Keepers, who provided some security for Roger Stone, and with the Proud Boys. But the question gets to be now, how much more connective tissue do they draw between the far-right extremist groups who are accused of plotting and planning and bringing tactical gear and weapons January 6th, and anybody else in the Trump inner circle? And one note, Norah, the Oath Keepers' seditious conspiracy defendants, they're on trial as we speak, a 5-minute walk from the Capitol at the federal courthouse.
Your Twitter feed is so good. It lays out every little detail about what is happening in that trial. It is fascinating to follow that. I want to bring in our chief election and campaign correspondent, Robert Costa. And Robert, the details as we think back to covering that campaign and those early speeches by Donald Trump, sort of laying the groundwork that the election was going to be stolen from him. He was already agitating the crowd about this. So many new details about the premeditation, including today, for the first time, this memo from Tom Fenton.
That's exactly right, Norah. Good to be with you. The details at times with these hearings, they can be overwhelming. It's a lot of information coming at you, but listening to the hearings are important because they present a chronology, and we learn more about the chronology this afternoon. And CBS News has confirmed a key date remains October 31st, 2020, Halloween, when Tom Fitton and other conservative activists were talking to the Trump White House, helping them, encouraging them to come up with a plan to declare victory on Election Day, regardless of what would happen in terms of the vote count. We heard about another date, January 5th, Trump bringing all of his aides into the Oval Office, saying regardless of whether Biden won, I want everybody activated on the 6th on Capitol Hill working for me. The chronology is everything in this story, both for the committee and, as you said, for the Justice Department as it potentially chooses to move forward.
And what about, too, when we also heard some new testimony today that when Trump was presented with that loss before the Supreme Court, that he told his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, he didn't want anyone to know about the loss, that it would be embarrassing, as if you could cover up a Supreme Court decision.
This is a scene that replayed itself throughout Trump's final days. As we've previously reported, Hope Hicks, an aide to Trump at the time, one of his press aides, went into him in the Oval Office and said, Mr. President, it's time to give up. You lost. You can go back to Florida. You can have a good life. And he said, I can't lose. My people expect me to fight. I have to fight. This was driven so much by Trump, not for an ideological reason, but a personal reason. He felt compelled to stay in office, to never accept defeat, and he still remains someone who has not accepted the results, and he's on the campaign trail for these midterm elections, talking still about election 2020.
Robert Costa, thank you. And John Dickerson, I want to bring you back in. I mean, Trump knew he lost, right? He knew the truth. He ignored it. And then, according to the investigators, he oversaw in a really an incredible orchestration of this. You know, in order to communicate something, whether it's the truth or whether it's untrue, it takes a long time. And he had done it for months and months and months. And months.
And, you know, when you go back and look at the origin story of Donald Trump, you read Maggie Haberman's book about him back in the 70s. This is a part of his DNA. These responses are all very familiar if you've looked at his history.
Shaping his own reality among people, creating his own narrative, regardless of the truth.
Narrative. Any obstacle gets demolished or driven around, even if the obstacle is the Constitution. And the key point you made is that this was not just one day on January 6th. This was 64 days between election night and January 6th. And then, because of the testimony today and what we've heard before about the president saying, I'm going to declare, and his allies saying, I'm going to declare it's a victory even if I haven't won it, that means this was more than a 64-day effort. And he tried every possible gambit. What happened on January 6th was just the last desperate gambit in a long string of them. And that's, again, what the committee's trying to point out, is that this is a much more lengthy response driven by the president.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Well, what you bring up is really important, his history. Because remember, and a lot of people will forget this, his former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, testified before Congress a few years ago and said he will not go quietly if he loses the election. A lot of people know his DNA. Just as you said, it's his history. Look at what he's done in the past. Look how he behaves. And that's what we see now.
But in this, I think, is just an exhaustive investigation. I mean, these hearings that we have had all this year has been exhaustive in its detail. I want to bring in A.T. Smith because he's the former deputy director of the U.S. Secret Service, 3 decades of experience in the agency. A.T., good to see you. I want to ask you particularly about that section by Congressman Schiff about just how much the Secret Service knew. Why do you think they failed to act? What did you learn today?
It's really disappointing to hear that, Nora. You know, after 9/11, we heard so much about connecting the dots, and it looks like now that they've uncovered a lot of information that shows that there should have been a lot of dots connected that maybe were not. I think at the very least, if all of the information had been disseminated in the way that it should have been, they would have been better prepared at the Capitol for the onslaught that occurred there. But instead, it looked like the arrangements at the Capitol that day were just for a normal day.
This was a question we were talking about. if they did know, as has been laid out here, the FBI, other intelligence agencies, even the Department of Defense knew about this, why wasn't something done? What could have been done?
I think from the security standpoint, it goes back to what we said, connecting the dots. At least the directors of all of the law enforcement agencies, to include the leadership in the law enforcement arm at the Capitol, should have been coordinating better. As you know, the aspect or the idea of the military being brought in, that's dealt with at different levels, either within the White House or the Pentagon. But I do agree, based on what we saw here today and the amount of information that was out there, particularly about the fact that they were going to be armed, that they were bringing all of the ballistic equipment with them. There should have been a lot of calls made, and there should have been some preparation that, unfortunately, I hate to say it, looks like did not occur.
I mean, this is stunning. Again, the evidence, that's what's been done here. There was this email, Secret Service email, dated December 26, 2020. They think they will have a large enough group to march into D.C. armed and will outnumber the police so they can't be stopped. Quote, their plan is to literally kill people. Please, please take this tip seriously and investigate further. The Proud Boys have detailed their plans on multiple websites. This information was knowable, Catherine, and there were parts of our government that did know it.
You know, before 9/11, the intelligence was so siloed that people said they couldn't connect the dots. What we see now and what I've heard consistently through my law enforcement contacts is it's almost an oversharing of information. People have it, but in this case, the system was blinking red and they failed to act.